and welcome. Thank you very much for joining us here on Times Now. This is Times Now Live and I'm Hina Gambhir. Viewers, in a big development, US President Donald Trump has claimed that the United States had carried out a large-scale strike against Venezuela, and Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, along with his wife, were captured and flown out of the country. In a post on Truth Social, Donald Trump has said this operation was conducted in conjunction with US law enforcement agencies, and more details are going to be shared during a news conference, a press conference that Donald Trump is going to hold around 9:30 p.m. Indian Standard Time. So this is the big news, viewers, that we are getting for you. And this announcement, in fact, was made by US President Donald Trump himself after we got reports of airstrikes in Venezuelan capital and other parts of Venezuela. Now, this is very, very important, viewers, because this was unexpected, and Venezuela's vice president, in fact, has confirmed that President Maduro and his wife, the First Lady, have been captured. In a statement, Venezuela says, and I quote, we don't know the whereabouts of the president and his wife. We demand confirmation that our president and the First Lady are alive. Now, this is the first statement of the vice president of Venezuela that we have got. And let's tell you how, in fact, Venezuela reacted. The government of Venezuela really reacted to the attacks, to the airstrikes that we witnessed earlier. Let's show you, in fact, what the Venezuelan government, in fact, has said in the first statement that it released on the airstrikes. They said they reject and denounce the airstrikes. This was the first statement of the Venezuelan government. They said that it's extremely serious military aggression by the United States of America. It's an attack on civilians, military localities in the capital city of Venezuela. This is a complete violation of the Charter of the United Nations. It also mentioned that such aggression threatens international peace as well as stability. And the Venezuelan government also mentioned that lives of millions of people are at serious risk because of this. Now, viewers, world leaders and governments have strongly reacted to the recent US airstrikes on Venezuela. What we do not know right now is where is the president of Venezuela and the First Lady, because the only update that we have got so far is from US President Donald Trump. He put out a post on Truth Social wherein he confirmed, one, the large-scale airstrikes that happened in Venezuela, and the second confirmation that he gave was that both the president and his wife have been taken away. Where are they right now? We do not know. In fact, a Venezuelan journalist, Indira Guerrero, thank you very much for speaking with us here on Times Now. She's joining us live. Can you explain to us how is the situation in Venezuela right now?
Thank you very much for having me. The situation in Venezuela, it's at the moment confusing. I think like the streets are in calm. Most of the attacks were in army bases or airports or in installations by the sea in the coast of Venezuela, especially in cities close to Caracas, and some areas inside the city. But there hasn't been any other attack in the last few hours, so things are more or less quiet at the moment. The government is calling all their followers to go to the street to organize them. As you know, the government has been preparing civilians for a war. So they are in the process of calling all these people who have been getting ready and going under preparation for an eventual attack.
Okay.
It doesn't mean that it's necessarily going to happen something. This group are mostly followers of the government, and they work more like propaganda force than a real army.
Okay.
The situation right now is I would say that at least the city, Caracas, where the attacks took place, it's quiet and yeah, most of the people are at home.
Okay.
They're just the day is just starting there, so
Okay.
we will
Now,
see in a few hours.
Indra, given how Trump has been, talking about Nicolas Maduro for quite some time, how there was also a reward on information leading to his arrest by US administration, did you see something like this coming?
I mean, I guess none of us expected something like this. Kidnapping a president of a democratic country is something that we never seen before, and I think there is no one was expecting any of this. Probably what we were expecting were some attacks and some point that where they believe were place of trafficking, but not kidnapping the president. So I think, yeah, this is something that we weren't expecting. And I think nobody was expecting this, like not in 2026. In a country that is not in war with US being bombed and the president kidnapped. This is...
Okay. Any information on the whereabouts of the president? Because the only info we got was from Donald Trump himself when he posted on Truth Social, about this particular airstrike and also how the president as well as his wife have been taken away. But after that, is there any information in the country that you have got about his whereabouts? Is it true that he has been taken to the United States of America?
Well, the vice president and also the minister, one of the ministers, Diosdado Cabello, which is seen as the number 2 in the government, have said that they have no idea, they don't know the whereabouts of the president or the first lady. So, yeah, I think that's the question of the day.
Now, what does it mean for Venezuela politically?
Well, there are a few answers for that. Like, if you ask me politically, without a president, what follows is the vice president has to take over and call for a new election in a month if they follow what the Constitution says. So, of course, like, there is a path. If the president is not there anymore for whatever reason, like, of course, the country has his own path to keep the state working. So that would be the case. And then the vice president, who is Delcy Rodriguez at the moment, would be in charge until the next election. So that would be what follows.
Okay. And
yes.
One last question before we let you go. We've also got information that Venezuela is going to launch massive military deployment for comprehensive defense. Now, this is something that the defense minister has said. It's a state of emergency also that the president had declared. How is the situation right now?
Well, I think, and we have seen this before, Venezuela has promised a strong answer to any kind of attack. But Venezuela doesn't have the equipment or the forces to respond to US in any capacity. They can only rely on the people's support if they still have any, because it's important to say that regardless of what you think about the international law or how unprecedented this is, like to kidnap a president of a democratic country, majority of the people didn't like the government, and majority of the people support the US attack. So right now, most of the people, I wouldn't say most of the people, because it's hard to say how big is that part of the country who wanted the government now. But we also saw in the past election that the opposition were the majority of the country. So for the last few months, most of the country wanted US to do something, as crazy as it sounds.
Okay.
So, like right now, you would see picture of the people celebrating on the street.
Okay. That's interesting. You're telling us that there are perhaps celebrations that can also be seen on the streets. You're telling us that a lot of people in the country, one, didn't like the government and they really wanted US to do something about it. Indira Guerrero, thank you very much for joining us here on Times Now. We'll, of course, be reaching out to you again to get an update on what's really happening in Venezuela, because it is a developing story. Thank you for the moment for joining us. Let's also now welcome my other guests who are live with us. We have Ambassador Yash Sinha, former diplomat, Angie Wong, Miami GOP committee, and we also have with us Brahmachalani, strategic affairs expert. Good evening to all of you. Thank you for joining us here on Times Now. Angie Wong, to you first. I mean, what's really happening? What are the plans of US President Donald Trump vis-a-vis Venezuela?
Yes, I was really surprised to hear that the journalist you just had on, who's on the ground in Venezuela, had no idea that President Trump and the Trump administration was going to go in and remove Maduro. That is something that has been long talked about here in the U.S. It's been in the planning stages for multiple weeks here. I know that you and I have reported on it, about all the airstrikes and closing down the airspace and striking the drug boats. So all of
I think she was specifically talking about the fact of the aspect of kidnapping the president. Maybe that was something that, you know, journalists on the ground, people on the ground didn't really expect, because she did say a lot of people expected US to do something about it, but kidnapping, I mean, I don't think they really expected that. Maybe she was referring to that.
Well, this is Trump's position, and Pam Bondi, the head of the Department of Justice, had come out to say that this is because both Maduro and his wife, they have drug charges here in the Southern District of New York that they have to face, which is why they were removed from the country. Now, I personally believe that is an extreme measure to bring someone into a court, but that is going to be their defense, because if it's not for that, then there were perhaps certain international laws that were violated here. So this gives them a little bit of a breathing room to say, we need to bring him in for drug charges, and legally, within our own U.S. jurisdiction, we can do that. Outside of that, Trump really does not have any sort of jurisdiction to go and remove a foreign leader. So I think that's where we have to kind of decide as the fog of war kind of settles down this morning, as people are waking up here in the U.S. to this news. We're going to really decide what's going on here.
Okay. Ambassador Yash Sinha, what is your understanding of what has happened in Venezuela? I mean, nothing has really happened since that statement of US President Donald Trump. Things are fine on the ground. In fact, there are celebrations in some parts of the country. That's what we have learned. But what do you make of it? And in your opinion, what happens next?
Thank you, Hina, for having me on your show. At the outset, I'd like to clarify, I was India's ambassador to Venezuela from 2007 to 2009, when Nicolas Maduro was the foreign minister and Hugo Chavez was the president. Now, what has happened today is extraordinary. In fact, I'm reminded of that term, extraordinary rendition. They did that with the criminals and most wanted people. They've done it with the president of an independent country. So I think obviously this is a flagrant violation of international law. Now, be that as it may, we have sketchy details. Celia Flores, the President Maduro's wife, has also been taken in. I wonder why. Of course, she was president of the National Assembly of Venezuela from 2006 to 11. Now, having said that, the last election in 2024 was clearly hijacked by President Maduro. He had lost, and he decided that he would get himself declared a victor. Now, but that doesn't give the right to any other country to come and set that right, or to install whoever they want to. because regime change is something that is not authorized by international law. It is not authorized by the United Nations. And if we are governed by international law, then obviously this action is not a part of what is considered the multilateral working the system. Now, that system obviously is in complete disarray. But having said that, I think in Venezuela, there will be a large number of people who actually believe that Edmundo Gonzalez, the opposition candidate, had won, and if the election was stolen from him, and the opposition should rightfully be in power. So I think what your panelist from Venezuela, the journalist, said is perhaps the option in case the vice president takes over and she calls for elections. Now, Delcy Rodriguez has been foreign minister of Venezuela. She's been the Minister of Finance and Foreign Trade. So I think we'll have to wait and see how things develop. The most important factor to consider is where does the Venezuelan military stand? Obviously, its credibility has been shot since it allowed, without much resistance, it appears, the rendition of their president, the bombing of their capital city, without any, of course, the US has far superior forces, but even a semblance of a defense appeared not to have been mounted. Was it a surprise attack? What they caught by surprise? We don't know those details. But I would like to see how things pan out in Venezuela. The Interior Minister, Diosdado Cabello, is the number two, in effect the number two, because he's been a very powerful member of Chavez's party, and he is the interior minister. He was earlier governor of Miranda. So we'll have to see how this pans out, because the Americans, if they don't launch a ground invasion, which I don't think they will, because they would have claimed victory with the rendition of Maduro and his wife. I don't know what the Venezuelan military can do except quell the opposition if they come out on the streets, or if the people want this government or this regime out. So it'll be interesting to see how things develop.
Well, absolutely. We all are going to be keeping a close eye on what US President Donald Trump has to say in just a few hours from now, because that's when we will find out how did this happen and what happens next. Mr. Brahmachalani, in your opinion, was it a surprise attack or a planned move? Because it's not really easy to kidnap, literally, if I can use that word, the president of a country and the first lady, and nobody gets to know.
The US has a long record of militarily intervening in sovereign states and doing things that nobody expected. For example, many are comparing the latest military intervention to the Panama model, where the Americans intervened, they captured Noriega, and they put him on trial in the US. But I think the most striking parallel between what has happened in Venezuela is with the US invasion of Iraq in 2003. The Americans used the false pretext of weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to intervene in that country and to capture President Saddam Hussein. Now, similarly, a false pretext that Maduro was running a narcotics export ring in an export racket directed at the US has been used as the narrative to justify this intervention in that country. But the fact is that once you intervene, it's easier to intervene than to control the developments that will inevitably follow your intervention. We know what happened in Iraq after they invaded and subsequently captured Saddam Hussein. Did they win Iraqi sympathy, Iraqi public opinion? Was it won over by capturing Saddam Hussein? No. That was the beginning of America's military quagmire in Iraq. So capturing Maduro and celebrating, as Trump will do when he holds this news conference, he doesn't understand the basics that if you go and actually capture an unpopular leader, he may be unpopular at home, but once you capture, kidnap a person, as you rightly use that phrase, capture the leader of a country, you turn public opinion in that country against the U.S. You will not be able to control developments in the U.S. You will incite a nationalistic upsurge against the U.S. And worse, what message are you conveying to the world? Not only have you flagrantly violated international law, you have clearly signaled to the world that the U.S. under Trump believes in the same principle that the U.S. believed under George W. Bush. Might makes right. In the 21st century, is this the message that the U.S. wants to send?
Okay, interesting. Now, Angie Wong, the point really is all eyes are going to be on what happens next. I mean, this will definitely lead to a regime change in Venezuela. But what is going to be the role of United States of America? Is America going to be involved in Venezuelan affairs for a long time? Or is this the only thing that perhaps Trump and Trump's administration wanted to do in Venezuela? Now they have got nothing to do with what happens in that country.
Well, I will tell you, from being a representative here in Miami, we receive a lot of Venezuelan refugees here. In fact, we have Little Venezuela. I will tell you, from overnight, there's been dancing in the streets here in Miami. People are crying out of joy that Maduro has now been removed. And we don't have confirmation really yet that he's been fully removed. Remember, all of this is under the pretense. Something that my colleague here had just said, this is a little bit different from the weapons of mass destruction and removal of Saddam Hussein by Bush. Maduro and his wife were actually convicted in a New York court in 2020 under the Biden administration. So they're being brought here to the U.S. to face those charges. Very different from the mass fantasy of having weapons of mass destructions and then going into Iraq. So I just want to make that point a little bit clearer. What happens next? Well, clearly Vice President Rodriguez wants to know, is Maduro dead or alive? Because the proof of life will then lead to the next stages. Is she then going to take over, whether temporarily, and I don't know if their constitution allows her to run to be the president, but she has 30 days to call an election. It is not going to just default to Maduro. I think the other leader, Maduro, thinks that she's just going to go in there with her first 100-day plan, but that's not really going to be the case. There's likely going to be a new election that is called fairly, where the people vote. See, here's the thing with the U.S. We remove the problem. We take out the threat, but we do not want to go in and install a leader, because that would be a horrible look for us. That is not what we want to do. We want the people to elect their next leader.
Brahmacharlani, will you like to respond?
Well, first, just because the Biden administration had indicted and convicted Maduro doesn't make that charge credible in international eyes. The U.S. has a track record of engaging in false narratives and in false charges. The fact is that if Maduro had been guilty of any drug running or involvement in drug trade of any kind, then the proper course would have been to allow for an international investigation into the allegations against him. But no, it's the U.S. which used a contrived political case to indict Maduro.
Right.
That doesn't make the charges against Maduro credible. More importantly, Trump won his presidency in 2016 by campaigning on one important aspect. That was not the only aspect that he campaigned on, but he repeatedly made the point that the Iraq invasion of 2003 was one of the biggest blunders that the U.S. had ever made.
Right.
He called it a big, fat disaster, a
Right.
big fat mistake. He kept repeating that
Right.
throughout the campaign, and he was seen because of his condemnation of the Iraq
Right.
invasion. He was seen as somebody who was going to bring refreshing change to the White House, and
Right.
yet the same president, the same man,
Right.
has done another Iraq, this time in Venezuela.
I think it's a very interesting point you've raised, and of course, there are many layers to it, and we'll be tracking all of those closely ahead as well. For now, I'm completely out of time. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us here on this discussion today. We have to quickly move on. There's some breaking news that we are getting for our viewers. Now we have a reaction coming in from Kerala Chief Minister Pinarayi Vijayan, who has slammed the American aggression against Venezuela. Kerala Chief Minister has put out a post on X, and you can see it on your screens right now. He's saying he strongly condemns the blatant imperialist aggression by the US on Venezuela by bombing various strategic centers. This reveals the vicious operation of a rogue state fueling unmasked hostility in the global south for imposing its devious schemes. It's also an act of terrorism posing a threat to tranquility in Latin America, a continent with the legacy of enduring such onslaught and anti-imperialist struggles. With this, we will slip into a very, very short break. We'll be back with more. Stay with us.